Senator from Alabama.
Madam President, last week, the House voted for a common sense proposal that's supported by the majority of the Americans. The House voted to protect female athletes. This week, it's time for the Senate to do the same thing. Before my time here, I spent many years as a coach, educator, and mentor. I've seen how sports can change people's lives. Athletic scholarships open up a lifetime of opportunities for men and women alike. Yet, today those opportunities for women are being threatened by a radical political agenda that is being forced upon the American people. When I was growing up, there were a lot less opportunities for female athletes. But 51 years ago, Congress passed Title IX to ensure male and female athletes both had access to lessons, life skills, and opportunities for advancement that comes from participating in sports. It's been one of the most successful pieces of legislation ever to come out of Congress. As a coach, I saw its impact firsthand. One of my first jobs out of college was coaching junior girls basketball. What a thrill. Title IX was just starting to be implemented when I took the job. I was there to see the incredible impact it had on young girls all over this country. For the first time, young women I coached had this equal access to facilities, resources, and competition. I saw those hardworking athletes go on to earn college scholarships, start careers, and become leaders in their own communities. I still keep in touch with a lot of them. I'm deeply proud of them. I wonder if they would have had the same opportunities without Title IX. Would they had the same access to the ability for success? Before Title IX, a lot of schools, there was no such thing as college women's athletics. Very few collegiate championships for women's sports existed, limiting opportunities for female athletes to achieve greatness. Before 1972, when Title IX was enacted, there were only about 30,000 female athletes in college sports and only around 290,000 in high school sports. For comparison, at the same time, 3.7 million males were playing high school sports. However, after Title IX's enactment, that changed very quickly. Because of Title IX, female participation at the college level has risen more than 600%. Yet now female athletes are again being told to give up their ability to compete and compete for second place. Women and girls are suffering at the hands of an ideology. The Biden administration has taken a sledgehammer, a big sledgehammer to Title IX. A few weeks ago, on Good Friday, of all days, Joe Biden's Department of Education issued a new rule completely reinterpreting Title IX. As usual, the Biden administration is trying to legislate from the White House, the executive branch, because they know their radical ideas would not, and I repeat, would not make it through this Congress. This type of change should require a bill, but Biden, again, wants to change federal law by simply publishing a new rule. Biden's rule change says schools cannot ban boys from participating in women's sports, or else they'll lose their funding. I can't believe we're even talking about this. The proposed rule is 116 pages long. It is so vague that schools, they're not going to know what to do. They're not going to know how to interpret it. The vagueness is going to let the Biden administration selectively enforce rules and intimidate schools into taking the most cautious position. It is a backdoor national mandate to force schools to allow biological males to play in women's sports. Schools that choose to protect female athletes would face punishment from the government if they didn't allow it. The rule is expected to go into effect this coming fall, 2023. That means teachers and coaches will have to begin opening their girls' and women's teams, fields, and locker rooms to biological males. It's unfair, it's unsafe, and it's downright wrong. To be honest, it's moronic. As a former coach, I can tell you, coaches will do what it takes to win. Coaches want to keep their jobs. The only way to keep your job as a coach and to deal with the pressure is to win games. College athletics is a big business, a big, big business. There are conferences that make near $100 million per school a year just for television rights. So there's a lot at stake. Under the Biden rules, all of the incentives are for biological males to dominate women's sports. They're only a very small percentage today. Only one study shows trans athletes make up about 0.00025 of athletes in women's college sports today. Very small percentage. But frankly, one championship or opportunity ripped away from a female by a biological male is one too many. And the Democrats are here to argue differently, and if they do that, it's shameful. 10 years from now, I suspect the situation is going to be very, very different. The Supreme Court last year voted to allow college athletes to get paid for their name, image, and likeness. A few years from now, coaches and players would stand to make millions of dollars through playing biological males against women. It's only common sense if that's not going to happen. Because winning is the only thing that counts in college and professional athletes. That's the only thing that counts. Biological males will and would dominate in virtually every women's sports. Women's sports as we know it would be over. Biological girls would simply drop out of sports or never choose to play in the first place. Is this really what the Democrats want? Is this really their plan? Do Democrats really want to end women's sports? Do Democrats really want to ruin the dreams of young girls who want to be the next world-famous gymnasts like Suni Lee, or tennis player superstars like the Williams sisters, or Olympic swimming legend like Katie Ledecky? Is that what they want? Is that really what they want? I'm grateful that many courageous female athletes are speaking out. Last week I spoke with one of the greatest athletes in history, Caitlyn Jenner, who is fully supportive of this bill of keeping men and boys out of women's sports. Because we've all seen young women like Riley Gaines, who had to watch her national championship dreams get taken away by a biological male. This was after she was forced to share a locker room with that adult biological male against her will. Riley Gaines was at the University of Kentucky on an athletic scholarship. But what would happen if a young girl is forced to compete against a male in high school? That young girl could finish in second or third and watch her scholarship dreams disappear. Already, 28 championships have been taken away from girls and women at the hands of biological males. You have got to be kidding me. Males have 40 to 50% greater upper body strength and 20 to 40% lower body strength. It's dangerous to put them on the same field with women. This is basic biology. What did we see from the Party of Science last week? Exactly 0 Democrats in the House voted for this bill. 0. The Party of Science seems to have skipped biology class Now the question is, will any Democrats in the Senate show a little bit of courage and stand up for women? Just a little bit. Will any Senate Democrats vote to protect their daughters, their granddaughters, or great-granddaughters? I'm anxious to see this. Will any of them do that today? Democrats have been talking a lot about women on the Senate floor lately. Democrats seem to think the only thing women care about is abortion, ending the life of a child. What about women and girls who want to be athletes or go to school on an athletic scholarship? Does that matter? Not a single House Democrat voted to protect girls and women in sports. Today we're going to find out where the Senate Democrats stand. The bill the House passed last week would stop this administration from forcing schools to let biological males compete against women. In fact, the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act does just the opposite. It prevents a school from receiving funds if it lets boys compete in women's sports. Americans do not want the federal government footing the bill for a policy that is a slap in the face to women who have worked so hard to become athletes. A clear majority of Americans support this bill. Clear majority. Poll after poll has proven that. It's time to act before the situation gets worse, and it's going to get much worse. So now, I'm going to give this body a chance to stand up for women athletes. Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.R. 734, which was received from the House. Further, that the bill be considered, read a third time, and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table.
Alabama.
Thank you, Madam President. I join my colleagues on the floor to talk about Joe Biden's economy. Over the past few weeks, the President traveled across our great country. He's been giving speeches on what he calls Bidenomics. He's bragging about how good our economy is. I've got news for the President. The American people aren't buying what you're selling. 2/3 of the American people disapprove of him on the economy. 2/3. 3 out of 4 Americans say our country is on the wrong track. Most economists think we're going to have a recession within the next year. We all hope that doesn't happen. Nevertheless, I agree with the American people. Bidenomics has been a disaster, a complete disaster for the people of this country. When Joe Biden took office, this economy was ready to take off. We were opening back up after the pandemic, but obviously, Joe Biden took credit for that too. The Congressional Budget Office said the economy didn't need any stimulus, no more money. We were expected to fully recover within just a few months. Guess what? Our president didn't listen. He signed the biggest stimulus bill in history. Joe Biden spent $2 trillion that we didn't need. It wasn't paid for. We didn't have the money, but we approved it anyway in this room. That $2 trillion is going straight to the national debt. $32 trillion. Embarrassing. Even the Democrats' own experts warned them not to do this. President Obama's economic advisor, Jason Furman, said, "I don't know any economist who is advocating for a spending bill that size." Bill Clinton's Treasury Secretary, Larry Summers, said it would cause inflation. Well, sure enough, a month after the Democrats passed their spending bill, inflation started going up. Now prices are at 14% higher than they were when President Biden took office. 14%. Gas prices are still up by more than $1 a gallon since this president took office. The price of diesel is raising costs for farmers in my state of Alabama and across America, and they're struggling. In total, inflation has cost a typical American family more than $8,000 annually since Joe Biden took office. Last summer, Joe Biden and the Democrats started spending trillions in taxpayer money again. Didn't learn a lesson. It was an election year, and they must have thought it was going to help them in an election. As of today, Joe Biden has authorized more than $4 trillion, that's not billion, that's $1 trillion in spending. That's more money than we spent in World War II. Again, this is after the Congressional Budget Office said we didn't need any stimulus. And again, it was money that we didn't have. We didn't have it. It's no wonder we've had the highest inflation in 40 years, and it's no wonder Joe Biden is the least popular president since Jimmy Carter. Record inflation has caused the fastest increase in interest rates in 40 years, and it's self-inflicted. The American people didn't do that. This city did that. The interest rates on a mortgage has doubled since Joe Biden took office, doubled. More and more young people are giving up on the goal of owning their own home because they can't afford it. Last summer, Joe Biden also raised taxes on nearly every person in this country. He wants 85,000 more IRS agents to shake people down because they need the money. They need the money to help pay this debt down, but they're going to take it away from the American people. That should never happen. So now we're paying the price for inflation. And we're paying more because of higher taxes. Last fall, a Gallup poll that showed a record number of people have given up on the American dream. Given up, that's what everybody wants to come to this country for, is the American dream. Folks, it ain't here anymore. It's gone. According to the poll, a majority of Americans do not think their kids will have a better standard of living than they had when they were growing up. Joe Biden shouldn't be bragging right now. Joe Biden ought to be on an apology tour across this country because it's embarrassing what we've done to the debt and what we've done to inflation and prices all over the country. He ought to apologize to the American people for robbing them of thousands of dollars that they work for, that they shouldn't have to send to this place to spend when they don't need it to be spent. He ought to apologize to the people who are giving up on the American dream. 2/3 of the Americans, people disapprove of the handling of Joe Biden's economy. And I agree with American people. Bidenomics has been a total disaster, and it will go down in history. It will go down in history. It will be remembered, but it will be studied of how not to run an economy. Totally wrong. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
Senator from Alabama.
I ask unanimous consent to vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this is my third year serving on the Senate Ag Committee. This is my first time of getting to work on a farm bill. The farm bill comes around every 5 years. It sets national policy on agriculture, nutrition, conservation, and forestry. In less than 2 weeks, at the end of this fiscal year, the current farm bill will expire. In 2018, this bill had a price tag of $867 billion. That's right, $867 billion 5 years ago at 2018. Now, we used to think that was a lot of money. But the upcoming farm bill is almost double that amount at roughly $1.5 trillion. This is the first $1 trillion farm bill in our nation's history. The enormous price tag of the bill is driven by an 84% increase in SNAP, or federal nutrition assistance, and a 58% increase in conservation programs. In other words, a huge increase in welfare and climate spending. Most of this new spending is not support or for support of our farmers. The $559 billion increase in SNAP funding was done directly by the Department of Agriculture through updates to the Thrifty Food Plan. In other words, nobody in Congress voted for this. The $35 billion in conservation funding was done through the Inflation Reduction Act of last year. Democrats are pushing through priorities that cater to climate activists and lead Americans to become dependent on welfare benefits. Approximately 82% of the upcoming Farm Bill goes to SNAP, commonly known as food stamps. 4% goes to conservation. Just yesterday, we hit $33 trillion in debt for this country. Yeah, I said that, $33 trillion. That will be picked up, this tab, by our grandkids and their kids. Now, this graph here, developed by the Farm Bureau Federation, showcases the enormous increase in nutrition spending and the steady decline of farm spending over the last 50 years. As you can see, SNAP spending is almost double what it was 5 years ago. How is this even possible? Has poverty doubled in our country in the last 5 years? Of course it hadn't. The poverty rate has been between 10 and 20% during my lifetime. 10 and 20%. We've spent $20 trillion in the war on poverty, and we have not even moved the needle. What does that mean? That means we're not doing our job. All we're doing is we're paying for somebody else to do it. So it doesn't work. Yet I've never heard of my Democratic colleagues consider the way we fight poverty. We just give out money. If my colleagues on the left cared about poverty, then they would want better results. But nobody wants better results here. They want votes. Welfare spending. If we'd ever get in our heads, welfare spending does not lift people out of poverty. Are we ever going to realize that? It simply makes people more comfortable remaining in poverty. And that makes it wrong. It makes it wrong for this body that we continue down this path of poverty and not helping poverty. Food stamps are supposed to help people stay afloat while they work to become self-sufficient. Help them get through tough times. Not a free walk in society. It should not be an incentive to stay home other than to train and want to get a job. But that's exactly what it's done. Making someone dependent on government is not helping them. It's hurting them. The whole purpose of the Farm Bill is supposed to be to help farmers. What an idea. Yet $7 out of $8, again, $7 out of $8 in the Farm Bill is for something else. Our farmers depend on crop insurance, commodity programs such as the Agriculture Risk Program, the ARC as we call it, and price loss coverage, which is the PLC program, and disaster programs to help them deal with difficult crop yields, markets, and rising input costs. Farmers can't control the weather or the price, and that's the reason they need help. We have to remember, farmers put food on the table, but there's a lot of people that don't understand that. These are some of the hardest working people in America, and they have too little to show for it. Back home in my state of Alabama, I have heard the struggles facing our row croppers and our specialty crop producers. They need help to deal with inflation and rising input costs. Farm production costs have increased 28% since Joe Biden took office less than 3 years ago. That's embarrassing. How in the world can we increase prices 28% in this country in 2.5 years and expect the people of this country to survive, the hardworking people, farmers included? Fuel and fertilizer are 60% to 130% higher than they were in 2021. Folks, we can't survive with that. But my colleagues on the left are not even concerned about it. Not one bit. We're just going to cut back on digging oil and gas and buy it from other countries and charge the heck out of taxpayers in the United States of America for oil and gas that we could produce here. Other farm expenses like land, cash rents, labor, and equipment are all adding up. As a result, net farm income is projected to decrease by roughly 23% this year. Costs are up, incomes are down, and farmers are struggling to survive. We are on a direct collision in this country of closing our farmers out and having to completely depend on other countries for our food and other things that we eat. Think about that, completely depend on other countries. We just found out going through this COVID crisis that we were completely dependent on other countries for our drugs. We said, we got to overcome that. We got to redo that. Now we're doing the same thing to our farmers. We do away with our food, it's over. Because you think if their prices are high now, they'll be completely a lot higher than they are now. The only thing that's keeping our farmers afloat is called the Farm Safety Net. But the current support levels for Title I commodity programs like cotton, peanuts, and soybeans are not high enough to sustain our farmers for over the next 5 years. In other words, this safety net is a level of pricing. If the price goes under a certain amount, we help our farmers overcome that cutback where they can survive. The problem is that safety net price has not been risen since 2012. And we don't think the prices haven't gone up. We've lost our mind. If we don't raise these reference prices, and right now, my colleagues on the left don't want to raise those reference prices for our farmers, we're going to be buying all of our food and everything that we eat from other countries. It's coming. We have got to raise our reference prices. We've got to help out our farmers. These programs and these reference prices allow our farmers to continue clothing, feeding, and fueling every citizen in this country and a lot of other countries. Now, we don't need to idly sit by while our hardworking producers work tirelessly and barely survive under this Joe Biden economy. I ask my colleagues, I beg my colleagues on the left to wake up, open your eyes, and support our farmers and fight for this farm bill. Raise the reference prices. Help them out, because if we don't, there won't be a need for another farm bill. Our nation's food security is going to depend on it, and the lives of all American citizens are going to depend on it. Mr. President, I yield the floor. And as you listen to the Israeli leaders, that's exactly what they plan to do. Israel's going to be able to do this. They're going to be able to do it themselves. They're not going to need our help, but they will need supplies. We need to ensure that they have what they need to wipe Hamas off from existence. I support sending Israel more weapons if they need them. But unfortunately, there's already an effort to tie Israel funding to Ukraine funding right here in this building. President Biden sent over a request for a supplemental funding bill just this past weekend. It includes $14 billion for Israel, but it also includes $60 billion for Ukraine. That's $230 million a day. That's 4 times as much for Ukraine than it is for Israel. The war in Ukraine has nothing to do with the war in Israel. Israel is our #1 ally. Sometimes people forget that. Ukraine is not our #1 ally. They're not even in NATO. The war in Israel is about killing terrorists who want to kill not only people in countries like Israel, but also Americans. There's no reason Ukraine and Israel aid need to be in the same bill. I'm against that. I'm for funding Israel, first and foremost. So we need to vote on them separately. We ought to support Israel, and we need to supply Israel. We need to stand with them as they take on the terrorists. It's going to be a very, very tough and grueling job, but we support them. Mr. President, I come to Florida today to express my strong, very strong support for Israel. On October the 7th, Israel was suddenly and deliberately attacked by a group of terrorists. Now, they didn't attack military institutions, they attacked citizens in Israel. It's been described by some as Israel's 9/11 or Israel's Pearl Harbor. They killed women and children. They filmed themselves, and they broadcast it on the internet. They were proud. They were very proud of what they were doing. They killed more than 1,400 innocent people. This includes more than 30 Americans. Sometimes that's forgotten by our mainstream media. This is the largest terrorist killing of Americans since 9/11. More than 100 people are still hostage by Hamas. And this also includes Americans. So we need to do 2 things. First, we need to get the hostages out. That's very, very important. It's been too long. Then we need to ensure that this never happens again. You know, Israel can do both of these things. Israel has a very highly advanced military and a highly advanced economy. The only way to ensure that Hamas cannot ever attack again, as Israel says, is to wipe them from the face of the earth. This is Israel's mission, and we hear this from their leaders every day. The role of the United States in this conflict should be to support and supply. So let's first talk about support. Over the last 2 weeks, we've seen left-wing protests against Israel and support of Hamas. It's hard to believe, but it's very, very, very true. We've seen them overseas in London and in Sydney, but we've also seen them here in the United States on college campuses. You know, to me, that's absolutely disgusting. I'll just mention a few examples. Students at Harvard, mind you, defended Hamas of what they did. Next, they'll be complaining about not being able to get jobs. I wonder why they won't be able to get jobs, especially on places like Wall Street. Students at the University of California, Long Beach, handed out flyers with pictures of Hamas. The list goes on and on, but this tells us a lot about the state of our education in this country. I was involved in education for 40 years. I can understand it. These kids don't know the first thing about the Middle East or about foreign policy. A lot are not taught this. But they have been marinated in woke ideology since grade school. at a lot of our public schools. Left-wing groups are siding with terrorists because of this. Today, there are protests happening here at the Capitol, right here on Capitol Hill. The appropriations hearings with Secretary Austin and Secretary Blinken have been repeatedly, every few minutes, interrupted by left-wing, pro-Hamas protesters. Pro-Hamas leftists shut down a building in the House just a couple of weeks ago, shut it down. Now they want to shut down the Appropriations Committee. Many of these groups are funded by Democrat dark money groups. These left-wing groups are calling for a ceasefire over in Gaza. This is like calling for a ceasefire after Pearl Harbor, as some of the leaders in Israel have said. To me, a ceasefire is a surrender. A ceasefire means Hamas gets to kill civilians without any consequences after what they did on October the 7th. Every single Democrat in the Senate needs to condemn these left-wing groups. Everybody. We all need to condemn these groups. The left is making excuses for these terrorists. It's immoral and it's un-American of what's going on across our country and with these protests. We need to ensure that terrorists never, ever attack anybody like this again. This requires, again, wiping off Hamas from the map. Madam President.
Senator from Alabama.
Madam President, I joined my colleagues on the floor to support our ally Israel on October the 7th. Israel was suddenly and deliberately attacked by Hamas terrorists. The terrorists targeted innocent people, not military targets. That's very important. They killed thousands of civilians, including dozens of Americans. They filmed their own atrocities and put videos on the internet. They were very proud of what they were doing. It is absolutely disgraceful. The United States has supported Israel from the very beginning. The first leader in the world to recognize Israel was Harry Truman. Administrations from both parties have strongly supported Israel, but now the Biden administration is trying to ride the fence. Joe Biden knows that his voting base does not like Israel. The left dislikes Israel. In their woke ideology, they say Palestinians are oppressed by Israel. It's just not true. Since the war broke out in October, liberals in Congress and around the country have expressed sympathy for Hamas. It's been especially bad on college campuses. I'm not even going to repeat some of the things that have been said by Democrat members of Congress. Joe Biden has also continued to practice appeasement of Iran. When Joe Biden took office, Iran was dead broke. They had access to just a few $1 billion in foreign currencies. Today, they have 10 times that much money. This is because of loosened sanctions and because of oil sales by Iran. Iran is the #1 sponsor of terrorism in the world. Iran provides funding for Hamas and for Hezbollah. But Joe Biden is helping Iran to get rich. There is no question that sanctions relief for Iran will end up in the hands of terrorists. Joe Biden wants to ride the fence, but we can't ride the fence on this one, not for our ally. This is a battle between good and evil. This is about an ally of the United States of America fighting terrorists who kill innocent women and children. And let's remember, the terrorists killed Americans too. Hamas would love to kill more Americans, and they will kill more Americans if they get the chance. So Israel needs to wage a war of extermination against Hamas. I'm supporting this legislation to provide $14 billion in aid to Israel. Unlike the Democrats' request for foreign aid, this is paid for. We pay for it by canceling out the Democrats' plan to supersize the IRS. Are they more important than Israel? Last year, the Democrats cut the IRS a check for $80 billion. They're planning to hire 80,000 new IRS agents. They want to double the size of the IRS. They want to shake down the American people for every last dime. The wealthy, they'll be just fine. The wealthy have tax lawyers and accountants. It's families and small businesses who will pay this price. A report from the Joint Tax Committee says that the Democrats' bill last year raised taxes on almost every tax bracket. So last month, every senator went on record on this bill to support Israel. Every Republican voted for it. Every Democrat voted against it. Now, it's clear for all the American people to see who supports Israel. Pretty simple. Who has other priorities? The Democrats blocked this bill today. They're just doubling down. Democrats care a lot more about the IRS, bureaucrats shaking down small businesses, than they do about supporting our ally Israel in their fight against terrorism. It's time for the Democrats to stop riding the fence, stop trying to play both sides, and let's support our ally Israel and ensure that the terrorists are defeated. I yield back to my colleague.